Okay, I'm just checking on the mic. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear, Juti.
Oh, good. Okay, so we're going to start with brothers.
I've lived in many countries and mixed with many men. I shared the days of sunshine, gone with them in the rain. The fires at evening said we were brothers. The fires at evening said we were brothers.
A soldier I saw weeping beside a dying friend. My officers had said I must hate him to the end. But seeing his grief I knew we were brothers. But seeing his grief I knew we were brothers.
A man sat on a doorstep to see the children play.
The gentle way he smiled there would charm your fears away.
A stranger he but loved made us brothers. A stranger he but loved made us brothers. One day I climbed a mountain with friends of other lands. The words we used were different, but joy one understands. Our gladness in God's world made us brothers. Our gladness in God's world made us brothers. The words and customs vary like waves upon the sea. One life beneath the surface binds everyone to me. Who knows the truth knows all men as brothers. Who knows the truth knows all men as brothers. Then brothers, why endeavor to set ourselves apart? The fences we've been building squeeze tight upon our hearts. Come sing the truth that all men are brothers. Come sing the truth that all men are brothers.
We'll sing this beautiful chant. I believe it's from Yogananda. Think ye in thy heart, lotus feet of thy Guru. If you want to cross the ocean of delusion, shaming the white lotus in purity, beyond all duality, Guru image of Brahma, deliver us from delusion. If you want to cross the ocean of delusion, if you want to cross the ocean of delusion, shaving the white lotus in purity, shaving the white lotus in purity,
beyond all duality. Guru image of Brahma, deliver us from delusion. Guru image of Brahma, deliver us from delusion. Thinking lotus feet of Rama. Lotus feet of Rama. If you want to cross the ocean of delusion, if you want to cross the ocean of delusion, chaining the white lotus in purity, chaining the white lotus in purity, beyond all duality. Guru is at Brahma, deliver us from delusion. Guru image of Brahma, deliver us from delusion. Lotus feet of Rama. Lotus feet of Rama. If you want to cross the ocean of delusion, if you want to cross the ocean of delusion, chaining the white lotus in purity, chaining the white lotus in purity, beyond all duality. Guru image of Brahma, deliver us from delusion. Guru image of Brahma, deliver us from delusion. Lotus feet of Rama. Lotus feet of Rama. If you want to cross the ocean of delusion, if you want to cross the ocean of delusion, chaining the white lotus in purity, chaining the white lotus in purity, beyond all duality. Guru image of Rama, deliver us from delusion. Guru image of Rama, deliver us from delusion. Guru image of Brahma, deliver us from delusion. Guru image of Brahma, deliver us from delusion. Lotus feet of Rama. Lotus feet of Rama. Lotus feet of Rama.
Take that beautiful thought into our hearts and mind. Guru, image of Brahma, deliver us from delusion. We'll meditate for 5 minutes.
Remaining in this inward state, listen to Affirmations for Self-Healing by Swami Kriyananda. This week's affirmation is courage. There are 3 kinds of human courage: blind, passive, and dynamic. Blind courage doesn't count the cost until it finds itself faced, horror-stricken, with the bill. Passive courage is the strength of will to adjust to reality, whatever it may be. And dynamic courage is a strength of will not only to accept reality, but to confront it with another reality of one's own making. There is a 4th kind of courage, not human, but divine. Divine courage comes from living in the awareness of God's presence within and in the realization that He is the sole reality. Live more in Him, for nothing and no one can touch what you really are. Now let's affirm in a loud voice, commanding the attention of the conscious mind. I live protected by God's infinite light.
I live protected by God's infinite light.
So long as I remain in the heart of it.
So long as I remain in the heart of it.
Nothing and no one can harm me.
Nothing and no one can harm me.
I live protected by God's infinite light.
I live protected by God's infinite light.
So long as I remain in the heart of it.
So long as I remain in the heart of it.
Nothing and no one can harm me.
Nothing and no one can harm me.
Now in a more conversational tone. I live protected by God's infinite light.
I live protected by God's infinite light.
So long as I remain in the heart of it.
So long as I remain in the heart of it.
Nothing and no one can harm me.
Nothing and no one can harm me.
Now in a whisper, taking it into the subconscious. I live protected by God's infinite light. So long as I remain in the heart of it. Nothing and no one can harm me. Now in deep silence, taking it even further into the subconscious. I live protected by God's infinite light. So long as I remain in the heart of it, nothing and no one can harm me. Now with rising aspiration, bringing your attention to the spiritual eye, searing this affirmation into the superconscious mind, affirm in deep silence. I live protected by God's infinite light. So long as I remain in the heart of it, nothing and no one can harm me. Prayer. I look to Thee for my strength, Lord. Hold me closely in Thy arms of love. Then whatever happens in my life, I shall accept with joy.
And we'll have our reading.
This is a reading from Rays of the One Light, weekly commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. Week 18, perfection is self-transcendence. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. We begin this week with a passage from the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 5. Love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. If ye love them which love you, what reward have ye? Do not even the tax collectors the same? And if ye salute your brethren only, what do ye more than others? Do not even pagans so? But be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. This teaching is a continuation of last week's lesson, to love all equally as possible only by seeing God everywhere, in others as well as in oneself. See whatever comes to you unasked for as a manifestation of His will. Be grateful for the pains you experience, for they are healing strokes of His love. Sometimes healing is effected only by strong measures, but His love for you is manifested in the very attempt to heal. Strive always to be impersonal, as though whatever happens to you were happening to someone else. Persecution gives us the supreme opportunity to deny the thought, this is happening to me, and to affirm our inner freedom from the thought of ego. Don't allow the negative perceptions of others to become your own self-definition. Seek God. This is the true goal of life, though how difficult to cling to in the midst of hatred, spite, and persecution. The Bhagavad Gita tells us in the 7th chapter, out of thousands, one strives for spiritual attainment. And out of many blessed true seekers who strive assiduously to reach me, one perhaps perceives me as I am. O truth seeker, be one among all those thousands who seek the supreme goal. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om. Om. Om.
We'll start out with a reading from Whispers from Eternity, Yogananda's beautiful prayer and demand book. And as we know, Master said that when he was gone, he would speak to us through whispers. And today I'm reading number 155, Demand for the Opening of the Spiritual Eye, the Eastern Star of Wisdom. Bless me, Father, that I behold the Eastern Star of Wisdom. May it shine before my human eyes as much in daylight as in darkness. Long my eyes were blinded by the tinsel glitter of materiality. Seeing things always outwardly, I saw not the spirit behind and within them. I saw the mustard seed of matter, but spied not the oil of spirit that it contained. My third eye of wisdom is now opened. Oh, may it always be so. Let the gaze of my single eye of realization penetrate through every veil of matter to behold the infinite presence of Christ everywhere. Bless me that my sacred wise thoughts, following this star of knowledge, lead me to the Christ in everything. So what a weekend we had last weekend. It was so beautiful. And I think everyone had the same feeling this week of this upliftment all week because the vibration was so high in the church. And I know we're not supposed to have pride, but I did feel this great sense of pride for our Sangha last weekend because everyone came together in such a beautiful way, in a very harmonious way to work together on every detail of the retreat. And this went on for months. It wasn't just a single weekend. And I just felt like that's really what this is about. You know, that's what this spiritual path is about, to really tune into God and the Guru, and then to use that attunement to have relationships with each other that reflect that love and that compassion and that harmony. I received many text messages and emails this week from people that came to the retreat, and several people who came for the first time from other states were just so complimentary. And one thing that many of them said was how kind our members were and how everyone was willing to help by giving rides and just helping people figure out the schedule. And they were just so struck by the kindness and the welcoming of our community, which is just lovely. And then yesterday, I had another interesting experience. The people across the street have been cutting the grass of the field that we just purchased behind us. His name is Dave. And his son called me yesterday because I had spoken to his father about if they'd like to continue cutting the grass. His son called and said that he would, and he would also cut around the church. And I asked him if he could give us, just give us a quote for how much it will cost. And it was so sweet. He said, well, I really feel that I'd like to do the first one as community service. And then he said, I noticed you have a vegetable patch started. And he said, I'd love to help maintain that. And so I said to him, well, this is a community garden for everyone. If you want to plant something, or anyone in the neighborhood does. And when I got off the phone with him, I felt so moved because it was such a confirmation that the vibration that we create in this church through praying together and meditating and loving God together, it doesn't stop at these four walls. It expands beyond the walls. And that's what Master talked about, that when we become channels of that light and love and peace and harmony in the world, we affect change. And I feel like that's happening just in our little neighborhood. The fact that this young man was so moved to offer to cut our grass as community service for the first time. Anyway, isn't it a beautiful thing to think? And not only is it in this neighborhood, but this church and our love for God is expanding in the town and in the state. And I like to sometimes visualize at the end of my meditations, this little church like a beacon of light, like a lighthouse, and it's spreading light everywhere. And that's what we're all doing in our individual practice, in our group practice, is expanding that light to everyone, because the world needs that now, as we know. We really need to expand the love in our hearts. And when you think of harmony, it's really born of wisdom and love, that our love for God and the wisdom we receive from that vibration of love from God helps us to be harmonious with everyone. And, that's really what we're talking about in today's reading, love thy enemy as thyself. And that's kind of a hard one. I mean, most of us don't actually have enemies, but we can have difficult relationships and that type of thing. And the more we tune into God's love and vibration, and the more we open up our own capacity to feel love and compassion for others. And just that thought of impersonal love, that was always a little hard for me mentally. I didn't really understand what it meant when I first came on this path, because Yogananda talks about it all the time. We should love impersonally. But the deeper that we go into this, and the more that we open our own hearts, we start to just feel this overall love for humanity. And that's what impersonal love is, where you can just look at all of humanity, all people, and feel the spark of the divine within yourself, connecting to the spark of the divine within, no matter what their ego is doing, because sometimes the ego acts out, as we know. But just to get beyond that, to get under the ego consciousness and to really feel God's love flowing through all of us, through all of creation. And it's important too that we create harmony within ourselves, because we can be really hard on ourselves. We can be very critical and judgmental, and I'm not good enough, I'm not doing enough. And we have to just banish those thoughts, because if we can't love ourselves as a reflection of God, then we really can't love others the way we need to. So that's another part of this that's really important, to really kind of get in and practice self-love and self-forgiveness, and realize that our guru loves us no matter what we do, no matter which mistakes we make, however hard we are on ourselves, that love and of compassion, deep compassion, is always there for us, because we are children of God. And judgment is a form of persecution, whether we judge ourselves or we judge other people. It is persecution. So really, when we get into that place of judgment, again, either for ourselves or someone else, we really need to stop and just change that attitude, change that energy flow, because it's a downward flow of energy. We want to bring the energy up. So going back to judgment, when we see something in another person that we don't like, it's because we have that in ourselves and we don't like it in ourselves. Or it's something that they possess that we want more of and we don't have it either. So that's something to think about too. Like, sometimes we get irritated by people, and that's just the truth, isn't it? Whether it's a friend or a coworker or a stranger. And whatever that thing is that is getting to you, just really self-reflect. And if it's a part of you that needs to come out in a more beautiful, loving way, then work on that. And if it's something that you wish you had, then you can work on cultivating that as well. And we know that thoughts are things. We're taught on this path that thoughts are things. Thoughts come from the causal world, the causal realm. Nothing can happen without the thought. So our thoughts are so, so powerful. Anything we think, it's kind of like taking a pebble and throwing it into a little pond, and that ring that comes out from the center, that's what our thoughts do. They're vibrations. Just like I said a minute ago, that our vibration of peace and love and worshiping God radiates beyond the walls of the church. Any thought we have, positive or negative, radiates out into the ether. And if we have a negative or judgmental thought about another person, they feel that in their hearts. They might just get a little bit, they don't know where it's coming from. They might feel sad, or they might feel just some downward current. And that's because we're energy beings and we receive the energy of other people. You know, the thought process doesn't have walls, just like the church. You know, thoughts just go out into the universe and touch us. So we want to really be conscious, again, of the thought process of what we're putting out. And Yogananda said that there's not a single relationship, however estranged, that we cannot reconcile, provided we do so first in our mind. So there's not a single relationship we can't reconcile if we just go into our mind and send love, and we change our perception of that relationship. And we know that through the peace and harmony prayer. If we're in conflict with someone, we can use the peace and harmony prayer. And it really does change. Even if the other person's not aware that you're praying that prayer for them, their soul feels that energy. And many of us have examples of using that prayer in a really difficult situation, and all of a sudden it evaporated. And that person that we were struggling with, suddenly we become a more harmonious relationship with. So to be perfect, as Jesus counsels, really takes a conscious change in our perception. So really to change our perception. And when I went to RISD, I used to listen to WBRU. Many of you remember that. It's a college radio station at Brown University that the students ran. The music was great. And I think it was every day, late in the afternoon, they had something called the Attitude Adjustment Hour. And it was 1 hour, is that right? I was trying to remember last night, but it was making me laugh. And some people said that's also code for happy hour, but this was very pure. It wasn't about drinking. But the music was like just very upbeat and optimistic. And if you were in kind of that slump at the end of the day and just kind of feeling tired and lethargic, by the time you listen to this music for an hour, you were like up and moving and your energy was uplifted. And so we can think of that, you know, in our own lives, taking that moment for an attitude adjustment, you know, when we're feeling low, or we're feeling that we're being judgmental to ourselves or others, or self-critical, to really turn it around. And Swami Kriyananda has a great story about that too. He said that when he first moved to Mount Washington, he was one day in a very, very, very bad mood, is how he describes it. He was being self-critical. He was being a little bit judgmental about others. And he just said he was in such a dark place, and he realized it. And then he said, I'm going to test out these teachings. And he said he took every ounce of energy he had, and he put his focus at the spiritual eye, and he thought of Guru. And he just really kept his concentration there. And he said within 5 or 10 minutes, he was completely uplifted, and he was able to just shed that negativity. And that's a really great reminder for us that we have that practice as well. We have it when we meditate every day, but we can make a conscious choice throughout the day when we're feeling that lethargy or that judgment or persecution or wherever we are, to just stop and come back to God, come back to the Christ center, and just feel the movement of the energy. I want to tell a story about a documentary that I saw this week called The Sultan and the Saint. I don't know if anyone's seen it. It's a PBS documentary, and it's about St. Francis. And it's about a very specific time in his life, which I didn't know anything about. It was a time where he traveled to Egypt. I didn't realize that he traveled to Egypt. I thought he just basically hung out in Assisi all the time. So at the time, it was during the Christian Crusades, and the Pope at the time sent a Christian army to Egypt to basically fight the Muslims and take over and then go into Jerusalem. So there was nothing Christian about what the Crusaders were doing. It was quite a terrible abuse, actually, in the name of Christ. So after the Roman army had been there for some time, St. Francis traveled with another monk. And when he got there, they had already been fighting for 2 years, and they were really doing a lot of damage to the Egyptian army. And Francis tried to plead with the soldiers, the Christian soldiers, there's no reason to fight. Let's spread the gospel of Christ. Let's spread the gospel of peace and love and compassion. And they didn't want to hear it. So he pleaded with the cardinal, Pelagius, his name was, who was running the army. And he said, please let me go over to the other side and speak to the Sultan and talk about our teachings? And he said, absolutely not. And then he thought about it overnight and he said, I'm going to send you over there, because he had an ulterior motive. He wanted Francis to get killed so that then they could have more reason to go and fight. But what happened was completely opposite. St. Francis went over and he met with the Sultan of Egypt, who was named Al-Kamil. And it turns out that Al-Kamil himself was a pacifist like St. Francis. He was a man of peace. And it really hurt him that he was in this conflict, but he was, they were defending their own land. And he invited Francis to live among his soldiers for several weeks. And during that time, St. Francis saw the soldiers, the Egyptian soldiers, answering the call to prayer 5 times a day. And he was so moved by their devotion and their love for God that he realized that, religion of all types should be honored. And many scholars and historians believe that St. Francis's praises of God was inspired by a tradition the Muslims have called the 99 Beautiful Names of Allah, or the 99 Beautiful Names of God. And some of them are, God the all-compassionate, the all-merciful, all-kindness, all-forgiveness, and the peaceful one. So basically, by naming the qualities of God, it's a practice, almost like a japa practice, where you're opening yourself to that reality. And he was so moved by that. And, St. Francis really demonstrated that true perfection in God. Instead of getting pulled into the rhetoric of the time that the Muslims were enemies, where they were, at that time, they were considered less than, he saw this whole other part of humanity through that situation. And then there's one more part of this story that's really remarkable. At one point, the Sultan realized that the only way that they would get ahead in this battle was to release some of the dams of the Nile, because the Christian soldiers were camped in the lowlands. So they flooded them. And at one point, they were up to their waist in water. And within a few days, the Sultan realized that they were starving and that their animals were suffering. And with and then of course he stopped the flooding, but with great compassion, he sent his soldiers, who were their enemy, with 5,000 loaves of bread to feed the soldiers. And he brought barley to feed the animals. And then once, everyone was strong enough, they left. And that was how the conflict ended. But isn't that the perfect example of love thy enemies? That these men, these Christian crusaders that were attacking and killing all the citizens of Egypt, then those Egyptians turned around and offered them food and comfort. And that's such an example. And that's what Francis did too. St. Francis, he wasn't a saint at that time, he was just called Francis, but he went there and he offered love, and he offered the true teachings of Christ, which is to love thy neighbor as thyself. So it's a really beautiful way to think about that. Again, like the deeper we get into the heart of the Christ consciousness, then it's almost impossible not to be kind and compassionate to others, even the people that give us trouble. If we really get into attunement with God, we can see that just as an example or a way for us to learn and grow ourselves. In today's reading, be grateful for the pains you experience, for they are healing strokes of his love. And that makes sense. When we go through really difficult times or difficult situations with people, it's an opportunity for us to grow spiritually. It's an opportunity for us to be the bigger in the situation, to really tune into God's love and forgiveness and compassion. Today's Gita reading: out of thousands, one strives for spiritual attainment, and out of many blessed truth seekers, one perhaps perceives me as I am. So let's all be the ones. We are the ones. We're at that point in our karmic spiritual development where we have the love and guidance of a guru. We all love God. So we're here for a reason. So we are the ones that they're talking about in the Gita. And by attunement to Christ's love, we can expand the energy of our hearts, out into the community, into our families, into the world, and to those who hurt us even. And like St. Francis and like the Sultan of Egypt, we can really embody that message of love thy enemies as thyself. Offertory.
Now we we'll have our offertory. Please take what you would like to give, place it in your right hand, and repeat after me. Divine Mother, we offer to thee the fruits of our labors.
We offer to thee the fruits of our labors.
Bless this offering,
Bless this offering,
that it serve as a channel of thy light to truth-seeking souls everywhere.
truth-seeking souls everywhere.
Amen. Yes. Amen.
Now we'll sing for you the prayer of St. Francis. We'll sing it through twice, and then we invite you to join us, those of you who know it. Lord Most High, our Heavenly Father, all our lives we dedicate to Thee. All our labors, all our joys and woes, all our pleasure, all our melody.
Make us each a channel.
Melody. Make us each
A channel of thy peace. When in darkness, guide us from above. Where there's sorrow, may we share thy joy. Where there's hatred, may we share thy love.
Lord Most High, our Heavenly Father,
all our lives we dedicate to thee. All our labors, all our joys and woes, all our pleasure, all our melody. Make us each a channel of thy peace. When in darkness, guide us from above. Where there's sorrow, may we sow thy joy. Where there's hatred, may we share thy love.
please join us. Lord Most High, our Heavenly Father, all our lives we dedicate to Thee. All our labors, all our joys and woes, all our pleasure, all our melody. Make us each a channel of thy peace. When in darkness, guide us from above. Where there's sorrow, may we sow thy joy. Where there's hatred, may